HQ in Nashville, Tennessee, to wherever you're cheering on your Tennessee Titans. The So Bros Network presents the Unofficial Titans Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the same duo that brought you an unnecessarily long deep dive into the history of Jake Locker, we are back to profile another Titans player from years past here on the Unofficial Titans Podcast. It's your boy, Big Natural Stoney Keeley. You can follow me on Twitter at Stoney Keeley, collectively at Sobros Network on all major social media platforms. Mine's right, ass is tight. As off-season content rolls on, we are going to be talking about the career, the life and times of one LenDale White. Some stars, they burn brightly, but they burn out quickly. And that's the case in today's topic of discussion. Of course, I've got my guy with me. The what's your position title at Stacking the Inbox, Zach? I got to know how to introduce you.
Editor-in-chief, I guess.
The EIC at stackingtheinbox.com. He is the founder, and at this point, we're just going to call him, it might not be the legally correct term, the sole proprietor of Football and Other F Words, because it is his show, Football and Other F Words, despite the Reddit people wanting to get rid of him. We're not resisting. It's his property.
I don't dip into the Reddit sewers at all.
How you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. We got, for full disclosure, peek behind the curtain. We are doing double duty. We're doing another episode recording after this for Stacking the Inbox. So this morning I was finishing up stuff and Canva was being a complete asshole.
Hey, Canva does that sometimes, man.
Yep.
I don't know, like my projects get tangled up and I'll realize that I've updated a template that I needed for something else, but I didn't get the notification. Like it's super easy to click a button and suddenly you've got like an extra slide on an existing project and then it overwrites. I don't know. Like I love Canva, but at the same time, there are times that I'm like, this is not a very intuitive, user-friendly interface. So maybe I'm just a boomer.
I think you may be just a little bit of boomer. I think my issue was like this MacBook, what do they call it? It's just the hard drive for the Mac, the operating system or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just starts, I could press a period and then it just like hits like 15 periods. So
yeah,
it's just one of those days.
So we're talking LenDale White on this week's episode, and I just from the jump, I kind of want to know where you stand on the guy. Are you a fan of LenDale White, or are you just completely indifferent to him?
I liked LenDale White during his time here. When I pulled up his stats, I kind of you hit the nail on the head. Some stars shine bright, but they, burn out faster. And I can't believe that he only played 4 years in the league. That seems wild to me. But I know LenDale White probably a little bit more than most fans will.
Okay.
I mentioned on Jake Locker the episode, but we have sold cars to LenDale White.
Oh, cool.
And I've met LenDale White a few times, as well as Jake Locker. So I know a little bit more about LenDale White and all that jazz, but nothing but a hilarious, nice guy who just kind of hit that wall where something happened, and I don't know what, so I can't tell you what. But something happened, obviously, where he just fell out of football and fell out of wanting to work at football, I think. And I think that's evident in weight issues and general narratives around him. But my God, I mean, for playing 4 years, he had 127 rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous.
It is, man. Like,
oh, sorry, that's 127 first downs. Sorry, 24 touchdowns, but still, that's a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah, that's oh shit. Yeah, I was thinking carries when you said touchdowns, and for some reason we were both wrong there. But could you imagine if he had scored 127 touchdowns in 4 seasons?
Insane. So that's first downs on here.
But it's really, I mean, we say that he played in the NFL for 4 seasons, but I mean, his rookie year, he was used pretty sparingly, which we'll get into. And then that 2009 season when he's reportedly in the best shape of his life, and he's still outshined by Chris Johnson. They really ramped up the carries for Chris Johnson. That was his 2,000-yard season. So when you peel it back a little bit, he really only had 2 really, really good seasons. That 2007 season and then the smash and dash year in 2008, which, I don't know, like, I think that's probably ultimately his legacy, but I think it's an interesting career to look back on because of, like, how good he was for those 2 years, and then the way he just fizzled out of the NFL quickly and what ended up happening to him after football. I think it's a really good story there, and I love LenDale White. I I'm not a jersey guy at all. I never buy jerseys. I have one Titans jersey, and it's LenDale White's. I can't fit in it anymore because I had it when I was in college, but it's the only Titans jersey I've ever owned is a LenDale White jersey. So I'm stoked to talk about him. I kind of think when we talk about this franchise's history at the running back position, it's a lot deeper than people give it credit for. I mean, obviously the names that immediately come to mind, Eddie George, Derrick Henry, Chris Johnson, but there is like a second layer of running backs that were pretty damn good in their own right, and guys like LenDale White, um, Chris Brown, Travis Henry throughout the years, DeMarco Murray. I I kind of look at LenDale White on the same echelon as those guys, but where do you think he ranks in Titans history among the running backs that are so well known?
I mean, I think he's just underneath. If you were to ask me, okay, so including Oilers running backs, I'd probably have LenDale White as like, I think he was the sixth or seventh most talented running back the Tennessee Titans have ever had.
Yeah,
And
I'm with you.
at his peak, we're talking about that 2007, 2008 season, right?
Yeah,
We're talking about a guy who averaged 11 touchdowns a season. Um,
with a
I
committee
mean,
behind him. I mean,
right.
technically a timeshare at the position.
I I think that when you go back and watch, I really liked the combination of LenDale White and Reggie Bush anyway.
Yeah,
But there's something to be said about LenDale White's season at USC during that time, and nobody really talks about that was a really deadly duo. Like
yeah.
if you go back and think about it, right? His college season, 700 freshman year, 754 yards.
Mhm.
Freshman year, 5.3 yards per carry.
Yeah,
As his next year, 2004, 1,103 yards, 5.4 yards per carry. In his final season as a junior at USC, 1,302 yards, 24 touchdowns, 6.6 yards per carry. And so he went 13, 15, 24 in 3 years. This is real. I am double checking this. 3 years at college, 52 touchdowns.
yeah. Is that total? Is that including the receiving? Because I know
No,
he
that's
had
just rushing, but he only had like I think 5 receiving touchdowns.
because he had
Um,
2 in his final season at
yeah.
USC. That season, he had
He had
26 total touchdowns
total touchdowns was 57 touchdowns.
while splitting a
So
backfield
you
with Reggie
know,
Bush.
Reggie Bush during that same time frame had 25 touchdowns
Yeah,
and 13 receiving touchdowns. So when you talk about how good those guys were, because they came in at the same time, they played at the same years, and we're talking about 3,169 yards for Reggie Bush, 3,159 yards for LenDale White. Their seasons, we're talking about 52 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns from LenDale White versus 25 rushing touchdowns. Like
yeah,
his throughout the year, right? Okay, so just rushing touchdowns, 52 rushing touchdowns from LenDale White. Okay, just rushing touchdowns. Combined for his career at USC, combined with Reggie Bush, receiving touchdowns and rushing touchdowns, 38.
That's insane.
Career.
That's insane.
Career.
I bet you people don't even realize that.
I listen, Reggie Bush is absolutely electric. He's a dual threat, 1,300 yards, obviously, is a big deal receiving. He obviously had the massive amount of touchdowns, but nobody gives proper credit to LenDale White's talent.
Agreed.
And it's always overshadowed by Reggie Bush, Vince Young, and Matt Leinart. Like, it is overshadowed by those three guys, just how good LenDale White was coming out of college.
And I think that would happen again at the NFL level when the Titans draft Chris Johnson. I mean,
Yep.
if not for that 2007 season, and I mean, really, he only got that opportunity because Chris Brown went down with an injury and he saw an expanded role out of it. Like, I just like his biggest moments kind of feel like they happened when he's in the shadow of another player. And it's easy for fans to forget just how good he really was. I want to get into some of the USC stuff because there was like a pivotal moment in his life while he was at USC, but I skipped over a question by accident here. When you think of LenDale White from a stylistic standpoint, what's the first thing that comes to mind with just how he played and what he did well?
He kind of reminds me of like a muscle hamster Doug Martin. Like, I feel like he was muscle gerbil before muscle hamster existed.
He was like muscle groundhog.
Yeah, he was just a dude that had surprisingly, for when you look, if you just put him in pads and put him out on the field, you're looking at him, you're like, there's nothing remarkable about this guy. This guy's like putting me in pads if I had like, 30 pounds more of muscle and body fat. Like, it's wholly unremarkable kid. And his size is just like, he is just a blob.
Yeah.
It's just a mass. But he was so surprisingly nimble. He had like Jerome Bettis-like feet in my mind, like looking back on it and remembering some of the runs, some Jerome Bettis to his game. But really, he was a lot like, he was basically muscle hamster without the muscles, like the defined muscle. But he was that kind of running back to me.
He's a hammer, I think, is in a single word. He's a hammer. But I also think one aspect of his game that I always thought was underrated, he's got really soft hands as a pass catcher. And
they hardly ever used him that way.
You think about the size and the style, like he's a physical running back, downhill kind of guy that wants to hit the hole and run through you kind of deal. But whenever they got him out in space, and this was even the case in USC too, with Reggie Bush, who is, one of the best pass catching running backs in college football history, if not the best pass catching running back in college football history. But every now and then they dump one off to LenDale, and it was just like automatic, like the type of hands that you expect a receiver or tight end to have on touched passes. Like
15.6 yards per reception his senior year of or junior year of college. 15.6 yards per reception for a running back.
He was a lot more well-rounded than I think people were willing to give him credit for, and it's because they didn't see it because teams just lined him up and ran him downhill. So that's what I always think about him. But I'm with you, man. Like there's a lot of Doug Martin. There's a lot of muscle hamster in his game. It's like if you from a size perspective, if you met halfway between Jerome Bettis and Doug Martin, you've got LenDale White. And I don't know, that was awesome. But now, okay, let's get back to his time at USC. The Rose Bowl game, USC and Texas. Where do you stand on that one? There's some people that still call it the greatest national championship, the greatest college football game of all time. What's your opinion on it?
It is still, it may not be the most memorable as an Alabama fan or anything, but as far as just an objective game, like you're watching, I think I agree. It's the most memorable game because I can remember where I was at. I can remember who I was with. I can remember everything about that game. And it was an electric game, and it really changed the narrative on maybe a couple different players and all that heading into the draft. And it was just, here's the best way to put it. Even if you don't consider it the greatest college game ever,
Yeah.
it is the greatest collection of players on the field at the same time.
Yes. I
So you're talking about Matt Leinart, you're talking about Vince Young, you're talking about Reggie Bush, you're talking about Michael Griffin was out there, you're
yeah.
talking about LenDale White. I mean, just the rosters of that game were just utterly ridiculous.
Texas. I don't remember who Texas's running back was for that game, but I feel like they were a pretty high draft pick, a pretty highly touted prospect as well. But to your point, just the superstars that were in on the field for that game, amplified by the fact that they went out there and put on a fireworks show too. It's not like
Jamal Charles. Okay, here let's look
Jamal
through this
Charles.
list.
There
Real
we
quick,
go.
okay, so let's just talk about this list. We got Vince Young, Jamal Charles, LenDale White, Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, and then there was also Steve Smith, who at the time
Steve Smith, yeah.
was pretty good coming out. But go back to the defense: Michael Huff, Michael Griffin, Aaron
Man.
Ross, Tim Crowder. I thought Brian Arakpo was from that Texas defense. And then I'm looking at the USC defense. Ray Maluga
Oh, I
and
love
Brian
Ray
Cushing
Maluga.
were both on that team.
Those linebackers, man, they had 3 of them too. There's a third guy that might have been the following year, but that USC linebacking core was a lot of fun to watch as well. But I mean, these are
That's
like
a lot of talent on the field at one time, and a lot of NFL players that went on to have pretty damn good careers, or at least were drafted highly, even if they flamed out. I mean, that's a pretty damn good list of players right there that you're not going to find. You'd be hard pressed, even in the college football playoffs, to find the quality of college draft prospects or
yeah,
NFL draft prospects on one team. Because let's think about it. Michigan versus Washington is pretty close, but Michigan had one player drafted in the first round,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And everybody else was drafted later. Washington had, I guess, 2 drafted in the first round.
3, Fautanu.
Fautanu, yeah. So, I mean, that one would probably be pretty close if you really
Yeah.
start breaking it down and everything, but still, it
But the
wasn't
game
as
wasn't
great
good.
as the game as the other game. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mentioned there's a pivotal moment in LenDale White's life in this game, and it comes on a 4th and 2 late in the game where White is handed the ball and he can't convert. He can't pick up those 2 yards. If he would have been able to convert that, USC probably runs the clock out and the Trojans win the national championship. Instead, there's high drama as Vince Young, I almost said Vince McMahon, as Vince Young leads the comeback to ultimately win it. LenDale has been quoted in stories since, or he feels like that single play, that 4th and 2, overshadowed all of the good that he did at USC. And he really took it hard and has since said, like, I should have tried to cut back or bounce it or any number of things I could do, whatever in my power to get those 2 yards, because he feels like the USC fan base still kind of holds that play over him. And it kind of goes back to there's similar parallels with what we were talking about, how LenDale White's talent may have been overshadowed by Reggie Bush to begin with. And then this critical moment, the biggest game of the season, arguably the greatest college football game of all time. And in that moment, he fails to pick up the yards that would have clinched the championship for his team. Do you think it's fair to blame that on LenDale White? And what is your response to kind of just how hard he's taken that throughout the rest of his life?
Well, I hate that he's carried that with him, because you don't want to live a life of regrets, and
For sure.
that's one big damn regret. But also, at the time, I remember wondering why Reggie Bush wasn't getting the ball.
Yeah, he
Because
wasn't even on the
LenDale
field.
White, he is a hammer. I do agree with that, but he's not to me, he's not a LeGarrette Blount. Like,
Yeah.
he's not a Mike Tolbert. He's not a, you know, Mike Allstott kind of
Right.
fullback guy where he's just going, or even Derrick Henry, or Eddie George, who you know is going to fall forward for 2 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of running backs. To me, he was never that kind of running back. He was just more of the perfect blend of surprising agility and speed and and sort of NFL level physicality.
Yeah.
And I thought that Pete Carroll and company really did a disservice as to not giving the ball to Reggie Bush, who was averaging 6.3 yards per carry, 9.3 scrim per touch, and he had
Yeah.
177 total yards so far. And listen, LenDale White had 3 touchdowns in the game. Reggie Bush had 1.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I feel like they tried to be too basic with it instead of, okay, first time it didn't work. Why not put LenDale White and Reggie Bush on the field at the same time, then by yourself? I felt like there was a lack of creativity that ultimately doesn't fall on the shoulders of LenDale White. Sure.
Yeah.
Looking at the all 22, you maybe should have bounced on the outside. But when you're talking about you got the helmet on, you have all this chaos in front of you, and you're being told to run in one direction, it's really hard at that point as a kid to make that decision. So I think he's been a little too hard on himself, and I feel like USC should be directing the blame elsewhere, not necessarily at LenDale White. But at the
What
end of
is
the
it?
day, as a player, you do have to convert. But again, was he put in the best situation to do that?
What is it with Pete Carroll and these big brain calls and big moments, man? Because he had the Super Bowl later on in his career too with the Malcolm
Yeah.
Butler interception play. I don't know what it is.
It just doesn't make sense. Sometimes I think it's a little bit of, you know, I think it's getting a little too cute because I mean, and maybe he didn't think, well, the USC surely doesn't expect us to run again out of the same formation or the
Yeah.
same look with LenDale White. And sure enough, with those linebackers, when you talk about those linebackers that you got right there, that I mentioned Ray Malaga and Brian Cushing, that's a tough duo at the goal line or to gain 2 yards, 1 yards on how many yards you need. That's a tough duo to do that
Yeah.
against.
And I think you're right. I think LenDale White is not necessarily the hammer in the sense that the Mike Allstott was, where he's just going to lower his shoulder and run through you. I think his power comes from how hard he ran and how hard he hit the
Yeah.
hole. Like if he hit the hole and you weren't prepared for it or you weren't at the right angle, you weren't going to bring him down, plain and simple. And so when you get him in the situation where you watch that play back, if there's not a hole there, he's not going to plow into traffic and just move a pile back for those 2 yards. So it's just I hate hearing that because in football, it's so rare to me, in my opinion anyway. It's so rare that these moments in games actually honestly come down to truly just one person. I think it happens a lot for kickers, if you miss a big kick or
Yeah.
something like that. But in moments like this, it's well, why didn't Pete Carroll have Reggie Bush on the field? Forget actually giving him the ball. He was on the sideline for the play. He wasn't even on the field to serve as a decoy or anything like that. Um, Look at the offensive line. Like, what happened for them not to be able to, work their magic and open up this hole and make it easier for the running back? So I hate to hear that that was something that impacted him so deeply, but ultimately, what do you remember the most about his time at USC? Like, how do you remember him as a Trojan?
I'll be honest, I don't remember much. I didn't really watch a lot of USC or anything like
Mhm.
that. I mean, I did watch a lot of Reggie Bush, but it's kind of like, Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart really just kind of steal the show.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's part of LenDale White's history is like he's always the background player. He's never really in the spotlight. He's the best supporting actor
Yeah.
kind of guy.
Yeah.
Um, So, like, I'd be doing a disservice to your listeners if I try to make up like something that I remembered about LenDale White or how I remember him from his USC days.
Yeah, I mean, you said basically the same thing that I was gonna say, like the supporting actor role. I think it's interesting to look back and think, okay, what if he lands at a program where he could be the feature guy? What would his college production, what would his career have looked like? How would that have impacted his draft stock? And I think it's interesting with the questions about the conditioning and everything at the time. Like, could it have actually hurt his stock if he had been the feature guy and maybe was asked to do a lot more? It's just something interesting to ponder. But the Titans draft him in 2006, his rookie season, 61 carries, 244 yards, selected at 45th overall, second round pick the year that they drafted Vince Young as well. So going for a 1-2 punch, kind of like reestablishing the new run game for the Tennessee Titans. What do you remember about his rookie season? How he struggled to kind of get his feet wet in the NFL, and what do you think about the Titans taking him with such a high draft pick?
Well, I think that's kind of reminiscent of when they drafted Derrick Henry.
Yeah.
They drafted a guy that produced in college and that produced at
Mhm.
college at a high level. And I think that if you're drafting running backs, that's what you got to do. Drafting Bishop Sankey was just like one of the big mistakes that I'll never forget. Chris Henry was another one.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
draft
man.
guys that produce. If you're going to draft a running back high, draft a guy that produced in college. It's
Yeah.
very simple.
Mhm.
You can't outsmart anybody. When they drafted him, they had Chris Brown, Travis Henry. So obviously they drafted him to be the next coming of Travis Henry because
Yeah.
Travis Henry went on that same year. He got 1,211 yards the year that LenDale White was a rookie. Um, you know, it wasn't always pretty with LenDale White, but you're talking about a guy that still got 4 yards per carry his rookie year.
Yeah.
It was 61 carries, 244 yards. It's not something to really write home about, but you saw enough from LenDale White where you're like, okay, you can build an offense around LenDale White. Now they chose not to, and it worked out in their favor. But I mean, I thought LenDale White was a guy that you could have as your lead back, and then bring and have he's a guy that could take on those carries that you were looking for, and you really saw it that second year, right?
Yeah.
Excuse
2007,
me.
Chris Brown goes down with an injury. White kinda picks up the baton and runs with it, post 1,110 yards, with, like, the first few weeks of the season being the second guy to Chris Brown at that point. So, at that point, I don't know, do you remember thinking, like, as a fan back in 2007, "Holy shit, this can be the bell cow right here with LenDale White."
I was because I was very surprised because I remember again where I was when Chris Johnson got drafted,
Yeah,
and I was shocked
you and
when
me
they
both.
drafted Chris Johnson, and because they had LenDale White, and I was shocked. I was like, okay, well, he's fast, but like he's from East Carolina, and you know, he trounced Memphis when he played. So funny
Yeah.
story: Chris Johnson and LenDale White were down there. They were hanging out together. They were one of them was buying a car, the other one just came with him,
Mhm.
and I had a Memphis helmet at my desk. And I brought the Memphis helmet in for Chris Johnson to sign because I already had a LenDale White autograph. And I brought it to sign. And he signed it, and then he put the stats of the game where he just destroyed Memphis. So it was pretty funny.
That is good.
But I was very surprised.
Yeah.
But that speaks to more of, I guess, Jeff Fisher and their faith in the passing attack. But again, when you go back and you think about it, you're like, well, man, LenDale White still thrived, right? We're talking about a guy that, even with Chris Johnson, 773 yards and 15 touchdowns
15
with Chris
touchdowns.
Johnson.
Yeah.
So to me, I always felt there was something there, and maybe it was a mix of maybe not resentment towards Chris Johnson or anything, but maybe it's more of resentment to the team. We know that
Yeah.
those last few years, Jeff Fisher kind of like the young players were not meshing with Jeff Fisher.
Yeah.
And we saw it from Vince Young, and I feel like we saw it from LenDale White and a few others. And it's kind of like, okay,
So
there's when Chris Johnson got drafted, it wasn't like he he kept wanting to turn. Didn't want to really prove him wrong or anything. It didn't really feel like he wanted to prove him wrong.
So I'm curious. I don't remember a lot of the reports from the era, but I remember what you're talking about with Jeff Fisher and like dealing with the rookies, the young players not really connecting with him anymore, his inability to adapt. I mean, it kind of sounds like somebody else we know, but that's neither here nor there. But I'm curious what you think, like looking back on it now, all these years later, do you think the decision to draft Chris Johnson was more of Jeff Fisher and company really wanting to diversify the run game and add an element of pure speed to it to complement LenDale White? Or do you think this drafting and subsequent usage of White is an indictment on him? Like maybe this staff did have concerns about the conditioning, the lifestyle and that sort of thing, and wanted to kind of put him in the doghouse a little bit.
Well, if you're talking about a guy that just came off a year where he went 1,000, almost 1,111 or 10 yards, right?
Yeah.
7
Mhm.
touchdowns. That's pretty damn good for a second year running back.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like there should have been conditioning issues then that you should have been worried about, because at the time that the season's over, you're like, okay, well, LenDale White, he proved himself. He looked really good. I think the drafting of Chris Johnson is more of an indictment on Vince Young than it is LenDale White.
Very
Like,
well.
I think that they did not want the ball in Vince Young's hands. We know that he did not like Vince Young. He didn't want to draft Vince Young.
Yeah.
They didn't really have really good receivers either. I think that they just wanted to be the team that played fantastic defense and ran the ball down your throat, which sounds just like another fucking head coach that we just got rid of. But
Yeah.
that's what they wanted. That's what they wanted. So I think it's more of an indictment on the lack of creativity and faith in the passing game than it was the lack of faith in LenDale White. Now, obviously, LenDale White did show up to camp, out of shape. He had conditioning issues. And so ultimately, it may look like that in retrospect, or you may have thought about it in that way. But I really do think it was an indictment of the passing attack. Right
He
or
does have
wrong, that's to me what it feels like.
he does have one of the Titans. It's a deep cut, but one of the Titans all-time sound bites when he's at training camp or whatever, and they're asking him in 2009 about how he got into better shape, and he says that he cut out tequila from his diet. Stopped drinking tequila, cut off the Patron, got into the best shape of his life. So that's why I kind of feel like there was something there with him. And later on, like way after football, he's quoted in stories. It's kind of taken the blame for accepting responsibility for showing up to the combine out of shape, showing up at training camp out of shape throughout his career. So if it's something that he knows, it just kind of made me wonder, is he feeling pressure from the other side of that to lose the weight, to get into better conditioning? And if that's something that's just, typical football coaching. It's like getting fucking better shape, and you're going to be used more, you'll be better, and all that stuff. Or if it was a sort of, I don't want to say punishment or anything like that, but I think that issue with the conditioning was a real thing. But I do think you're right, for a team that had a good offensive line, didn't really trust the quarterback all that much. It was about diversifying and really bolstering the run game that we saw come to fruition in that 2008 season with smash and dash and the lightning in a bottle that those two captured. What do you remember about just watching that season unfold and what those two did for this Titans team that season?
I think it was just incredible those 2 seasons.
Yeah,
I was in Seattle when Chris Johnson broke the rushing record.
sick.
Um, so that was really awesome. Except for I was in the press box, and in the press box you cannot cheer. Like
Oh
there's
yeah,
in the Seattle press box, and we've been in the Miami press box too. There's like a section where people could just actually like sit, eat food, drink, and enjoy the game. And then there's the reporters, but you can't
yeah.
cheer. So that was really tough not to be able to cheer when Chris Johnson breaks the record. Um, but I look back on those days and I'm like, okay, Derrick Henry's 2,000-yard season, Chris Johnson's 2,000-yard season, then smash and dash. Like the
Yeah.
smash and dash introduction are the top 3 rushing the rushing attacks that I've enjoyed the most, like
Mhm.
rushing seasons I've enjoyed the most. Better than anything Eddie George did. Like
Yeah.
to me, Smash and Dash, like those 3 are in a tier above anything any other running back did that I have watched, that I have experienced. So that does not include Oiler stuff because I did not watch and experience those. So
Yep.
all this Titan stuff, the 3 greatest rushing seasons in my mind were those 3 seasons. And I'll never forget, and I think this is probably I think this game encapsulates what LenDale White and Chris Johnson were and what they could have been for several years had
Mhm.
things not flamed out for LenDale White, if and this team hadn't gone to Mike Munchak, like all this stuff. Is that Kansas City game where they're playing the bongos, right? Like they're playing the bongos and all that kind of stuff. Like that to me is the game. That to me is the best. I don't care about playoff games. I don't care about killing the Patriots dynasty or any of that. The best rushing performance that I have enjoyed the most is that Kansas City game.
Yeah.
That Kansas City game was
That's the
incredible.
game he had his 80-yard touchdown run in, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, they went crazy in that
Yeah,
game.
and he like if he would have needed 82 yards for that touchdown, he would have been caught because of the long speed. But man, like one of those cases where he hits the hole and there's like no contact and he breaks through, and to be a guy built the way he was, to be as stocky as he was and heavy as he was at the time, for him to run 80 yards away from defenders was so impressive. And I think about that Thanksgiving Day game against the Detroit Lions. Now, the Lions, if I'm not mistaken, that was the 0-16 Lions. Like they were piss poor, but they just mowed them down. I mean, it felt like hit after hit after hit, chunk run after chunk run. I don't even remember what the stats were in that game, but I'm pretty sure both guys had at least one touchdown, and they just ran Detroit out of the building, out of their own building, in those ugly, awful, like plain blue and silver uniforms that look like high school scrimmage uniforms. They just go out there and mow them down. So, really a testament to how special that
They
season
each
was
had
that
2 touchdowns.
they each had 2 touchdowns. Okay, yeah. So,
And Chris Johnson had 125 yards and LenDale White had 106.
man, oh, they mowed them down. And it's a testament to how special that season was that you and I can just immediately pull up, oh, 2 different games that we think of. Longtime Titans fans, the old heads out there listening might be thinking of a completely different game, but the fact was it was a merciless, unrelenting rushing attack that season. I don't know. I mean, I'm with you in the sense like I can't attest for things that happened before my existence because I've never gone back and watched old football in that sense. But when I think of running back duos, the first 2 that come to mind are Smash and Dash, and then you had what was it, Thunder and Lightning with D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, if I'm not mistaken. Those 2 come to mind, but man, Smash and Dash feels like it's in a league of its own, and I don't know if that's just because I'm a Titans fan, but as far as, like, running back duos or committees go, the Earth, Wind, and Fire New York Giants committee was pretty good, but to me, Smash and Dash is the gold standard. I don't think anybody has done it as well as those 2. In our lifetime, Zach, where would you rank LenDale White and Chris Johnson
Oh,
among running
man.
back duos?
I'm trying to think if there's any better off the top of my head, and I feel like David Johnson and Chris Johnson that year in Arizona
Yeah. Yeah.
was pretty good.
Mhm.
Um, and I
Who
would say that Evan Coleman and Devontae Freeman was good at a time, and there were oh man, who was with
was it Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara for the Saints?
yeah, they probably are the best.
Yeah.
That they may be the best, and then I would also throw in. I'm trying to think. Ah, shit. There was another Atlanta duo because Freeman and Coleman, and then it was
Was it,
Dunn and
Michael
I think it
Turner?
was Work Dunn was still on. Michael Turner was a good one.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to this Kansas City game real quick.
All right, let's do it.
18 carries for 168 yards and 1 touchdown for Chris Johnson.
Yeah.
17 carries and 149 yards and 3 touchdowns for LenDale White.
I had them both on my
Just so
fantasy
you
team
know.
that season.
Just so you know. 123 passing yards from Vince Young that game.
God.
I think it was Vince Young, or it may have been Kerry. It was Kerry Collins.
Kerry
123
Collins was
passing yards, okay? But there was 332 rushing yards from
That's
the Tennessee
nuts.
Titans. So they to make it add those up, and that's 455 yards total in one game. But 332 of them, of the 455, were rush yards between two guys.
It's impressive.
It was a spectacular game.
Yeah.
I would have to say that I wasn't prepared for that question, and I would say that tentatively, I would probably put Smash and Dash as tops. As second, I would put Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram at the top. But I am fairly certain I'm probably missing a couple of duos that I would take.
That's what
those two.
Yeah, I'm thinking too, but I just I don't know. Smash and Dash is number one in my heart, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
After the 2009 season, or after the Smash and Dash season in 2008, in 2009, LenDale White famously cuts tequila out of his diet, eats less buffalo wings, shows up to camp in the best shape of his life, but it only translates to 64 carries in 13 games, 222 yards. It fizzles out of the NFL quickly. I mean, that was the end of the road for him. After that 2009 season, he'd never get another carry in the NFL again. Pete Carroll, he said before, is like a father figure to him. The Seahawks end up trading for LenDale White in April of 2010, but he failed a drug test and was cut a week later. The Broncos picked him up for a little bit, and he made it to camp, but he tears his Achilles, and that was all she wrote for LenDale White. Ultimately, the hourglass runs out on every NFL player, but it feels like this was a particularly rapid decline from one of the best in the NFL, one of the most underrated in the NFL, to just completely out of the league altogether, and no interest in him. It was the most surprising thing to me is that, for all he did, it felt like there would have been at least more teams kind of sniffing around for his services. What do you think it was that ultimately did him in so quickly? Was it just the injuries, or do you think the reputation he built throughout the pre-draft process about his conditioning and all the rumors about him throughout the years just turned teams off?
Oh man, he played 13 games in
Yeah.
only in 2009. And yeah, injuries is probably a concern, but it's probably his conditioning and effort in coming back from those injuries in rehab. I mean,
Yeah.
we got to be completely honest. LenDale White surrounded him. Players coming out of college back in the day, and I don't know if it's still like this now, but players around this time, Michael Griffin and Cortland Finnegan are two examples of two guys that ditched their college friends, ditched the posse, the groupies, ditched them, hired financial advisors, and took their work seriously.
Yeah.
LenDale White let his buddies derail his career. And I don't know if he would really come out and say this or anything, but and I'm not going to violate any of the stuff that I personally know. I just know that there was a huge issue with who he surrounded himself with, and they took complete and utter advantage of him, his kindness, his niceties,
Yeah.
and his loyalty to them. And I think ultimately all that stuff over those years compounded into not being able to have the focus on football that a player needs to have focus on.
Fair enough.
And I think at the end of the day, it's all about being in the NFL is all about maintaining focus. Does not mean you can't have fun. Does not mean you can't have side projects. You can't go out and do this. You can't go out and do that. But you have to have a dedication to your craft.
Yeah.
You have to know where your weaknesses are, and you have to try to either find workarounds around those weaknesses or turn those weaknesses into strengths. And it was evident that he had a hard time with consistency in that area. And I think that you're talking about a guy whose career got cut off way too short, and it's nobody's no one can shoulder the true blame except for himself.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well said. Very, very eloquent on that point. Yeah, I'm with you there. There is some tremendous lore surrounding LenDale White. I feel like there have been some really underrated moments in Titans history that we can get into a little bit. Namely, his rookie season. He kind of agitates his teammates a little bit in camp when he spat in Donnie Nicky's face after after an altercation. One, I want to
Listen,
ask you.
he may have deserved it. Donnie Nicky may have deserved it.
I want to ask you first of all, how insufferable would Titans Twitter have been if Titans Twitter was around during the Donnie Nicky era?
I mean, Titans Twitter is insufferable now, so I can only imagine if it had a more time to evolve and to
Yeah.
grow. Let's see. I think it would have been very tame back then, and it would eventually, let's say that it started when LenDale White got drafted in 2006.
Yeah.
So about 2010 is when it would have got really toxic.
Yeah.
And now, if we were in 2024 and it started back in 2006, my God, they'd have to shut it down. They'd have to shut Twitter down.
I think Donnie Nicky might be the OG Mason Kinsey too.
Probably. He probably would have been.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of guys that could have been the OG Mason Kinsey on this team back then. I'm sure Quentin Gaither would have been one of those guys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I forgot about him too. Yeah. Rank spitting in the face in terms of a disrespectful move. Like if you're trying to establish disrespect, like you are beneath me, where do you rank spitting in the face of someone? So I think like
it would be number one. I can't think. I mean, I guess maybe peeing on someone after you knock them out, or just after you hit them, then peeing on them. That's a combo. If you're talking about just one act, one part, I think it's worse than being slapped in the face.
I think an open hand slap.
It spits bad.
An open hand slap is pretty disrespectful. And I also think getting a drink thrown on you, if somebody throws a drink on you, that's pretty disrespectful, but at least that's not a bodily fluid. I kind of feel like spitting in someone's face is the ultimate disrespect move. And you know what? Like you said, maybe Donnie Nicky fucking deserved it. We don't know. We weren't in the room. There was an anonymous GM at the combine that said, quote, the guy needed a bra when he showed up and bared his chest. Supposedly some
titties flopping around.
Supposedly scouts audibly laughed when he took his shirt off. The Titans take him at 45 anyway.
I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised. You're talking about like there was no shape to him. There's no definition.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest thing about LenDale White when we talk about him, and I'd say that he's just a blob compared to like Adrian Peterson. Like you take that shirt off, he is basically Tom Brady with 10%. Dude, Tom Brady, like in college, his combine photo, right?
Yeah.
He's like Tom Brady with 20% body fat. Like that's what it was. It was just a shape. He was just there.
Did you have any
like
objections? Like Clayface. Yeah, that's if I was doing my draft comps back then, that would have been the one to make. Did you have any objections to the Titans taking him at 45?
No, not at all. Because I mean,
I didn't either.
Earlier, to me, it's all about you needed it. You had two aging running backs. And Travis Henry obviously wasn't long for the team back then, and then Chris Brown it's just Chris Brown.
Yeah,
and so like to me, it's you needed a running back, and getting him in the second round. I mean, we talked about 52 rushing touchdowns. I mean, in 3 years, dude produced in college. In a crowded backfield. So there was no reason not to draft LenDale White.
Yeah. And I think the pick worked out pretty well for the Titans, man. I mean, You would hope for better longevity, of course, but they got good production for a few years there, so I don't have any issue with it, especially, like, the more I've learned about what a crapshoot the draft actually is. I would probably consider LenDale White a hit. I don't know that you would say, like, great value at 45 overall, but again, different times, different era of the NFL. I'm cool with it.
Yeah, you would have liked to have seen him get the second contract,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
compared to other second round picks and first round picks the Tennessee Titans have made before and since,
Yeah.
LenDale White's one of the better second round picks. I mean,
Yep.
we just have to call a spade a spade. They have not done well in the second round historically. They I would say Derrick Henry, Austin Johnson, AJ Brown, LenDale White, because I think Ruse was he third?
I can't
I need
remember.
to go back and look at his draft history.
One of them was 4th, him and Stewart, the bookends for a while. One of them was a 4th round pick, if I'm not mistaken.
Hey, let's
I
just go
can't
through the
remember.
second round picks since 2000, okay?
Alright, let's do it.
Tank Williams
Oh
and
my.
Tyrone Calico,
Okay. The Vans are
Ben
rocking,
Drew,
don't come a
Travis
knocking.
LeBoy, and Antoine Odom.
Well, Antoine
Antoine
Odom
Odom,
was
about it.
yeah.
That's about it. Okay, then you got Michael Roos. Okay, so there's one. There's one really good one. Like
Mhm.
that's a great second round pick. I'll put Antoine Odom up there as well. I'll put Antoine
Yeah.
Odom on that list. LenDale White, I would say, is a good one. Then you go to Chris Henry after a year later. Ugh.
Ugh,
Jason Jones never lived up to hit that mark. Derek
no.
Marks did, but not with the Tennessee Titans.
Yeah.
They had no second round pick in 2010. Akeem Ayers never really lived up to the hype.
He had, like,
Zach
one
Brown
good year.
lived up to the hype over in Washington.
Yeah.
Justin Hunter, Bishop Sankey, Dorial Green Beckham. Then you go Kevin Dodd, Austin Johnson, Derrick Henry. So we got Derrick Henry. Austin
Yeah.
Johnson was good, but he wasn't second round good.
No.
No second round pick after that. Harold Landry, we'll put him in there.
Yeah.
AJ Brown, so we're up to 6. Then you got Christian Fulton, Dylan Radins. We'll put Roger McCreary in there because I think he's worth a second round pick. So we're up to 7.
Yeah.
And now we got Will Levis and Tavondre Sweat, which we still have yet to see.
Yeah.
So listen to all those names. 7 of them were good second round picks.
I've got a weird take now that Jason Jones is not a name that I've thought about in a long time, but it feels like
Super massive dude.
Jason Jones is like the Dylan Radins of the defensive line in Titans history. Anyway,
Jason Jones was interesting because he was good, but he wasn't really, I would say, second round good because he
I
never
remember
became the
him.
full-time starter. And he really took off in 2014, 2015, and his last two of his final 3 years. He did better in Detroit.
Yeah.
But he just never lived up to the second round hype. But let me tell you something. That's probably the biggest human I've ever met in person.
I if I'm not mixing up him and Jason Babin, who played for the Titans for a little bit, Jason Jones had, like, inhumanly long arms. Is that right?
Yes.
Am I thinking of the right guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are.
It's ridiculous. He looked like he was built in a lab to play defensive line.
He was. And he just never could get there.
LenDale was also one of the players that famously stomped on the terrible towel in the Pittsburgh
Yeah, I was at
Steelers
that game.
in 2008. Where do you stand on that moment in Titans history? Do you blame him and Keith Bullock and Javon Curse? Were those the 3 that were doing it? I can't
Yeah.
recall off the top of my head, but
No,
do
do it.
you
I'm all for it. Fuck them. Fuck
love the
Steelers.
energy or blame them for cursing the Titans moving forward?
No, I don't think they curse Titans. I don't
either.
believe in that kind of curse stuff or anything. I am all for it. Love it. You should do it. You should disrespect the other team as much as possible.
Disrespect
Every
your
game.
surroundings. There you
Every
go.
game, disrespect the opponents.
And Donnie Nicky. Disrespect your opponent and disrespect Donnie Nicky. Yeah. So Chris Johnson appeared on the Sims and Lefko show on Bleacher Report, and LenDale White's name came up because Johnson and Sims were both teammates of White's, and they shared a great laugh thinking about some of the excuses that LenDale White used to come up with for why he was late for important, serious meetings. Sims asked Johnson if he could list the greatest excuse he ever heard from LenDale White as to why he was late for a meeting. And Johnson's answer was LenDale told him one time that he was driving to the facility on his way to work and that his stomach started bubbling and hurting really badly, and he actually had to pull over and take a dump at a gas station.
I like it. I
Yeah.
mean, there has to be something better than that, though. I feel like that. I mean, maybe it's just the way he described it. Maybe he described it a little bit better than what Chris Johnson did. But I feel like there's got to be a better excuse from LenDale White than just "I got shit."
I the way they were talking, the chemistry in the clip, which is up on YouTube if you guys want to go check it out. The way they're talking, I like looking in their eyes and seeing the smiles on their faces. I feel like there's probably some stuff that they didn't feel comfortable sharing on the air. And that's just the one that could come across.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, maybe that's just the best radio friendly one. Maybe the least embarrassing, but most funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Least
So
scandalous.
after football, White would go on to struggle quite a bit with depression. At one point, he said that he thinks he might have had anywhere from 20 to 30 concussions throughout the course of his career.
Shit.
Dealing with pain every single day, he ends up popping pills to make things feel better, make things go away. And it's a pretty dark time in his life. And he says that he feels like football was taken from him. After some concern expressed from friends and former teammates, they end up forming a group chat with a bunch of former players that sort of serves as a sort of vent session for everybody. And it kind of helps to pull LenDale out of this funk that he's in. He eventually gets off the pills and switches over to weed for weed's healing properties. And an important distinction here is that White is from Colorado. He lives in Colorado. So he ain't breaking any laws in Colorado if he wants to smoke weed to feel a little bit better. There's a great piece from Jim Wyatt that was written in February of 2023 where he kind of catches up with LenDale a little bit. And there's a quote in it where White admits there were thoughts of suicide at this time. So I get a little choked up talking about it. Sorry. Like I said, I'm not a jersey guy, but this is the one Titans jersey I have. This is one of my favorite players of this era. And it sucks to read that, his career took this turn and it had such a negative impact on the guy. But he gives Chris Johnson a lot of credit for helping to pull him out of that funk. Chris Johnson gave him money. And you mentioned it, danced around it a little bit before. He was not particularly conservative with his paychecks, and Chris Johnson kind of pulled him out of that, gave him some money to get him going. They start a podcast together. It gives LenDale something to kind of occupy his mind with, and he credits Chris Johnson for saving his life. And I think it's a stark reminder of the lives that these people have away from the sport and what it means to them. And I circle back to the star burning brightly, but the star burning quickly. It can all be taken away in an instant, or in LenDale White's case, a season. And it's still heartwarming to hear that after all these years later, what smash and dash means to guys like you and me, where we think back about the touchdowns, the Kansas City game, the Detroit game, stomping on the terrible towels, going on that run to the number 1 seed in the AFC. The way we look at that run, and to think that all these years later, the meaning behind it and what it meant to two teammates, and one pulling the other out of a dark, deep depression. Man, it's a reminder that football is bigger than just a game. And its place in our lives, in our society. It's a special thing, and I think people should appreciate, to sum this podcast up, I think people should appreciate LenDale White, maybe not as one of the best running backs of all time, but I think he should be one of the favorites of this fan base because of his story. And man, I don't know. Smash and dash forever, man. Smash and dash forever. Do you have any final thoughts before we get on out of here on LenDale White?
Well, when you chose to do Wendell White, Wendell White, when you chose to do LenDale White, did you plan to do it in June because it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month?
I didn't. That's a total coincidence.
Well, this is a good reminder of.
I did it in June
I
because
think
nothing's
that-
going on in June.
There you go. Well, I think this is a good reminder for those that may be listening to this or maybe struggling with this, that there are people out there that care about you, that love you,
Yeah.
and that it's never too late to go get help,
Mhm.
whether that is help learning how to communicate, learning how to deal with your feelings. There's multiple ways um, therapy and improving your mental health can help you. And I think, back then, even it's a very taboo subject, men talking about their feelings and all this stuff, especially
Yeah.
back then. White's going through college and going through all this stuff. And, dealing with concussions. Like he said, he says he has upwards of 30. All that stuff compounds, but there's a certain point where I don't think young men know that it's okay to get help or even
Yeah.
how to get help. It's not so not to compare this to a reality show that I watch, but we're watching this show that just wrapped up called The Valley. And there is a character on there named Jax Taylor who has been on Vanderpump Rules before being on this new show, The Valley, which we're talking about over about 15 years of being, I think, on TV, having your life followed. And
Yeah.
now he's this, over 40, has a child, has been with this girl that he is now going through divorce with, for who has been way too good for him since the inception. He's cheated on her, he's talked to her like dog shit, he's had anger issues, rage issues, and he's always promised that he will get help but never goes and gets help. And then they're it's the wrap up show, right? So like
Yeah.
they basically, when the show ended, we didn't know if they were going to stay together or not. And since then, and the airing of the season finale, that was a couple days ago. And I'm sorry, this is a long-winded story that's not about football for your listeners, but it's about mental health and about how men view mental health. And so they go back and they decide to they bring in the cameras to follow where these people are now a couple months after, because a couple of these couples, they're all married. They're following a bunch of married couples in the valley. Two of them are now going through divorce or separation issues, and Jax and his wife Brittany are one of them. And so the cameras come back, and she's packing up stuff in the bedroom, going to the Airbnb with her son or with their son, and he's sitting there watching her pack, and they're talking. And he goes, I'm getting help. I've scheduled to get help. And she goes, when did you schedule it? And he says, yesterday. After a long pause, he says, yesterday. And she goes, so when the cameras come back on, or the cameras are coming, that's when you decide that you're going to go get help. And she goes, are you really going to go, or is this just for the cameras? He goes, no, I'm really going to go.
Mm.
And then they cut to a scene where he's in the confessional, and they ask him, so how was your first session? He goes, well, I didn't go. And they go, well, why didn't you go? And he goes, well, it was too far away.
Hmm.
And that's not just to harp on Jax in particular, but I think a lot of people look for excuses not to go get help.
It's
A lot
easy
of
to
men
do.
look for
Yeah.
excuses not to go get help instead of actually getting help. And I'm glad that even though it took maybe a long time and took football away from him, at the end of the day, I'm really glad that LenDale White was able to find a community, to find friends, to
Yeah.
pull him out of this depression and find better ways to handle his depression and mental issues. And I encourage everybody, if you are feeling down, sad, or anything, seek out friends that you know, because they'll listen to you.
Yeah.
And if you're really good at hiding it, they're not going to know that you're depressed. So,
Yeah.
but they're really good at listening, I promise. And also seek help.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting, it says a lot about both LenDale White and Chris Johnson that going back to his Reggie Bush days, like all accounts were that LenDale White was an awesome teammate and that he never really showed a lot of resentment or jealousy towards Reggie Bush or Chris Johnson. And for Chris Johnson to hang tight through all these years and really be there for White in his moment of need, it's just an awesome thing, man. And it's a testament to what you're talking about. Like, find your friends, be there for your friends, don't be afraid to seek help. White has said at a certain point that football was taken away from him and he was kind of unsure of what his impact was or if he had even made an impact. And I will say that from all the highlights, the years past, the 2007, the 2008 seasons, definitely made an impact on me, man. Some of my favorite plays to watch. And now I'm probably, whenever we're done here, I'm through with work for the week. So I'm probably going to fire up this game on YouTube and just go back and watch that Kansas City game again. But big fan of LenDale White. I think he deserves a little more remembrance and credit from the Titans fan base, even to this day. That's all I got, Zach. Any parting shots? What are you working on? Well, actually, no. This episode's not going to release for like 2 or 3 more weeks, so we can't promote.
Just
what we're
subscribe
working.
to stackandinbox.com.
There we go. There we go. And how can people find you on the social medias these days?
At FWordsPod on Twitter/X.
There you go. And I'm at Stoney Keeley, collectively at Sobros Network. Thank you guys for tuning in. At this point, I don't know what order the episodes are going to be going in, so who knows what you're going to hear in off-season content next week. I'm trying to cook up something pretty special for the series finale, or the season finale, I guess I should say. So stay tuned, rate, review, subscribe, all that. He's Zach Lyons. I'm Stoney Keeley. And until next time, you stay classy, Titans fans.